Hello and welcome to the Sexient Being Sessions. I'm Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach and reality guide. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to move out of their old toxic patterns, traumas, and beliefs to create relationships from a place of deep connection, pleasure, and fulfillment, whether with themselves or others. Today, I'm joined by the stunning Rachelrose. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Rachelrose?
Thank you. Rachel Rose. I am a psychologist and life coach, and I help women overcome trauma from either in their past or in relationships to find peace in who they are and move on in their lives with conviction and certainty.
Beautiful. Our topic today is boundaries, aka, as I call them, the big B. Um, they can be this thing, at least in my life, that have felt either very easy or very elusive, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And coming to a balance in that space, like not only within myself, but in relationships, has been a big thing in my life journey.
Hmm.
Um, Actually, one of the first points in time I got to talking with a counselor, I went through and told her, like, everything I had going on and coming up, and at the end of that, like, deep dive of me getting to do the storytelling, she's like, "Well, it sounds like you have some issues with boundaries." And I was like, "Oh, no, it's not that. It's something else." And so we worked together for a while, and about 3 to 6 months into her and I working together, boundaries came up as this big glaring topic again, and I was like, "Oh, you were right, like, this all leads back to boundaries."
Yeah.
And then again, during the Vita program, at another point, there was a beautiful question. It's like, okay, like, when you're having, like, good solid boundaries for yourself, like, how does that show up in your life? And when
Hmm.
your boundaries are weak or too rigid, whatever it may be, how does that show up in your life? And as I went through just like not even really thinking about my answer in
Hmm.
the weak or too rigid, I was like, "Oh fuck, boundaries." It just came out as this glaring thing again and it kept repeating that way and it each time to me it was this like, nope, here's a little bit more clarity on where you can adjust those a little bit more, right?
Yeah. Think it's interesting that you mentioned like how they're showing up for you, these boundaries. Uh,
Mhm.
is I think that boundaries it's multidimensional. Like
Yeah.
you said, you have to pay attention to how they're showing up for you, but also how you're showing up and other people are showing up in the boundaries that you have already set for yourself.
Yes.
And is that serving you? Is that serving your best interest in how you want to be perceived by others and the output that you're putting into the world? Is that serving you? Is that who you want as your integral person?
Mhm.
And are they serving you? Like boundaries aren't only set for other people. Boundaries are
Yeah.
everywhere. And we set them for ourselves too. Like boundaries as simple as setting an alarm. I'm getting up at 7 tomorrow. That's a boundary you're setting for yourself.
Mhm.
So are you showing up for yourself? And then externally, how are those boundaries that you're setting for other people, how are they showing up? Are they serving you? And evaluating that as well. So it's kind of like peeling back the layers of an onion in how boundaries show up, like how the boundaries themselves are showing up, how they're showing up for you, and how they're showing up for others. It's like a trifecta.
Yeah, no, no, and I completely agree. I think one of my biggest lessons, like through especially through like the earlier paths of me figuring out what in the world boundaries were, right? Because
Hmm.
I would have relationships where I was really good at being like, "Oh, this is a boundary for me," and stating it to the other person,
Hmm.
right? A big piece of that for my system and to actually integrate was I never actually have to state my boundaries to anyone.
Mhm.
right? My boundaries are something for me. If
Yeah. Yeah.
there can be a level of kindness, like if my my partner doesn't know that like because we're in a poly relationship, that I have an issue around him staying the night with somebody
Mhm.
else that he's playing with, and that comes up and I don't talk to him about it, right? I'm just like, "Nope, this is a no-go." Like, to me, that can be me being too rigid. But if I push it back and I'm like, "No, I'm being ridiculous," right? Or shame myself around that being this uncomfortable space that I'm not ready to fully explore or deep dive into,
Mhm.
at least at that speed,
Mhm.
then that becomes that weakness in my system to my own boundaries and listening to what's coming up in my own system.
Mhm.
So it's finding that middle point, and especially when it comes to relationships, it's like boundaries can be flexible. They're going to change, and especially depending on the trust and safety that is built in a relationship or within ourselves.
Mhm.
But it's finding that acknowledgement of where you're at right now.
Yeah.
And that old pattern was I would state my boundary to somebody else, they'd be like, "Oh, yeah, no problem," and then they'd keep they'd keep blowing through it,
Mm.
and I
Mhm.
would dismiss that that meant anything, right? That
That
and
one time
it
communication, yeah.
yeah, and it wasn't just, like, the one infraction, it would be, like there'd be this.
Oh.
I'd speak up about it and be like, "Look, like, this really isn't okay in my system," and the more I spoke up about it and the more those particular people wouldn't respect that boundary, or
Mhm.
even like they wouldn't even acknowledge it was an issue, or they'd say, I'm going to fix this thing, but they didn't have the action to follow up.
Mm.
The more I realized, like, no, like what is the consequence on my side? Like, what is the action I'm willing to take if
Mhm.
this boundary is crossed? Like, in some of the conversations with ex-partners, it was them name calling me during a conversation. When they would get flared and upset, they would start going into calling me a bitch or a cunt or
Mm.
things
Mhm.
like that, right? And I'd
Yes.
tell them, like, I'm not okay with this. But then I would stay in the conversation with them, right?
Right.
And then in that take on more of that same space where I realized, no, like just because I tell them this thing is my boundary doesn't mean they ever have to go along with it. The action part that really matters is on my side. And if they keep showing up with this behavior,
Mhm.
like how am I going to show up for myself?
Yeah. And that could even, be asserted to yourself as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're not beholden to, like you might set a boundary to wake up at 7 a.m., but that doesn't mean you're gonna.
Yeah.
Like, those are actions that you or the other person has to consciously take out
Mhm.
of their respect for you.
Yeah.
And that's what it is when you're in a situation and you've asserted your boundaries and you've let's say you gave it time and you allowed them a grace period to learn and implement this new boundary because it can be hard for some people, their gut responses.
Yeah.
So let's say you did that and they're still not doing it. That's a lack of respect that they're
Mhm.
showing towards you. And in turn, by tolerating it, you're now showing a lack of respect to yourself.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing to do. It's just not in your best interest. It doesn't serve your best interest at the end of the day. And
Yeah,
it can
and
lead you down other path. My dad always used to say, uh, the moment that you let one of your boundaries slide, your entire foundation crumbles.
yeah.
And
Yeah, and
yeah.
oh, no, I was just gonna say that that's a really valuable point. It's that in having those that boundary set up within yourself, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
One, you're showing yourself love by being willing to follow through with those things for yourself. You're standing up for yourself, even if that means you're walking away from a conversation
Mhm.
with somebody else.
Yeah.
And it is showing yourself love and like the way you're willing to allow yourself to be treated
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah. And I'll throw this out there just for anyone who's listening. If you do find yourself in a moment where you don't feel like your boundaries are being respected, you've asserted them, and the other person's biting back, one of my go to boundaries that I never cut on is okay, we need to take a minute. Let's go eat some food because I know myself and I usually am a very hangry person. And so we're going to take 30 minutes. We're going to go eat some food. We're going to drink some water. We're going to smoke a bowl, whatever it is you need to do for that 30 minutes. We're not going to talk to each other. We're just going to be in our being. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of value in one being able to recognize you need to step away,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
I'd say that first one is recognizing like, oh, I need to step away.
Hmm.
The second thing that can be really kind, because there is people with anxious attachment and avoidant
Hmm.
attachment and stuff like that,
Yeah.
is rather than just now storming off, walking away,
Yeah.
communicating, like, not even that you think they need a break. Like, if you're
Hmm.
starting to feel overwhelmed, and even if they're the ones who, like, the person who's acting really flared, that you need a break and
Yeah.
that you're willing to come back to this in 10, 20 minutes or
Hmm.
check back in 10 or 20 minutes, giving that defined timeline, because that can give a little bit of soothing to their nervous system as well,
Hmm.
especially if they are anxious attachment styles.
Yeah.
Um, because a lot of the time, somebody who has anxious attachment, if you say, hey, we can talk about this later, I can't do it right now, that can feel like this is getting pushed off and it's just never going to get
Hmm.
addressed again. It
Yeah.
also sets a timeline in your own nervous system to be like, okay, I'm going to give myself some space from this,
Hmm.
but it's not something I'm just running away from fully, right? It
Yeah.
shows an importance to the relationship and being able to work through something with somebody else.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you flat out don't care that that relationship proceeds, then by all means, like walk away and
Yeah.
don't look back at
Definitely.
all. But if you want to make sure that you're providing safety to yourself and to the other person,
Hmm.
that this isn't just going to get pushed under the rug. Um,
Hmm.
Definitely trying to communicate 20 minutes, we'll check back in. And maybe in 20 minutes, you're still not regulated enough, or they're still not regulated enough to have like a calm, respectful conversation. Then set a new timeline.
Yeah. And I do want to point out how important it is to reconvene.
Yes.
Like, it's not just about breaking the tension, breaking that moment. Um, like Alix mentioned about attachment styles, especially with avoidant attachment style, in that moment, that person is probably going to want to take that space. You know, they're an avoidant attachment style, so that's overwhelming for them in that moment.
Mhm.
But in the future, they're avoidant, so they're not going to bring it up. They're not going to be like, "Hey, okay, you know, I've had my time. Can let's talk about it." But that doesn't mean that they don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And so it is a two-way scenario, especially if like it's a anxious attachment with a avoidant attachment. It can be so hard for the anxious attachment person to reconvene the conversation because of that anxiety that exists already. Like, are they going to be upset if I bring it up? Like, are overthinking brains.
Mhm.
And then on the opposite side, the avoidant attachment person is doing the same thing, but like, oh, well, I guess they just don't care and they're just going to leave it at this. Like, I might as well just, you know, not care either. Like, like, there's a psychological battle going on in both parties' brains.
Yes, very much so. Um, one of the things I do think is important and for people listening, right, is like the main three categories of attachment styles are anxious, secure, and avoidant. Like that is not a tiering system. There is not a better than or worse than. It's just a way to help
I
everyone
definitely.
understand themselves and other people and the way those interactions may be going.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Secure attachment is more of that balance point where you're okay with giving other people space, but can also come to these places of connection. And it can be looked at as like, oh, like you're only securely attached if you started that way. There's a thing called earned secure attachment, and it's where like you notice that you're avoidant or you notice that you're anxious and you're willing to take those steps to move yourself towards more secure relationships
Mm-hmm.
and getting a little bit uncomfortable
Yeah.
in taking those steps for yourself
Mm-hmm.
so
Yeah,
that
I
you
think,
can continue.
yeah, that was beautiful. Basically same thought as you. It's one of the hardest things to do, but one of the most important things to do to find that balance that you were just speaking about is
Mhm.
to become comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's stepping into that place of discomfort and still doing it. And then doing it over and over again until that's no longer discomfort. It's just habit or you understand it like you were saying.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
one of the ways those things are formed is like pretty much in younger years and past relationships, past experiences, you have created a way to stay respectively safe
Yeah.
in relationships. Like that has served you at one point in time. But if you're finding it showing up where like your partners are constantly like giving you the feedback that you're too clingy, right?
Mhm.
Or that they're not feeling connected with you, especially when conflict is arising. Like it's really easy for us to show up securely attached when things are going great. It's the
Yeah.
points of conflict, the points that feel more like that relationship is going to be lost, where anxious and avoidant attachment styles tend to show up the
Mhm.
most.
Yeah.
Um, but having compassion for yourself and just giving yourself that notice that this is coming up, and then yeah, it's taking small baby steps because you're creating a new pathway for yourself to follow
Mhm.
in this space. You're creating an actual like new neurological network. And so you're doing this in little bite-sized chunks to tell your nervous system like, no, this is the path we're going to start taking. This old one, like it served at one point, but it no longer is.
Yeah. And also keep in mind that once you start doing something new to let's say break a bad habit for lack of better terms, you'll fumble a few times before you get the hang of it. It's like learning to ride a bike. You're going to fall over a few times and scrape your knee, but at the end of the day, you're still going to, you know, figure it out. So it's
Hmm.
okay to have like a period of time where you are trying to transition those boundaries to be ones that serve you in the now. And you fall back a couple of times into boundaries that used to serve you, which aren't serving you now that you're trying to work through. And that doesn't mean you failed at it. It means you're
Yeah,
working hard.
you're literally learning a whole new skill set. It's
Yeah.
if you think about a little kid learning to walk, like I actually just went through this with my son who's now 6 and he's learning how to ice skate.
Yeah.
And he hit a wall for himself, like, when we went to go to ice skating last week, and he's like, "I don't wanna go." But the prior
Oh,
week, he was still excited about it, and so he was falling into what I would call more of a dismissive pattern and being like, "Well, I'm just gonna fail,
so I'm
so I'm
just
not
gonna
even gonna
try.
try." And we ended up going through this space, and, like, he went back out, did another skating lesson, but this time it was more like him with a coach as a one-on-one session.
Hmm.
And in that, he got to slow down. He wasn't trying to keep up with all the other little kids ice skating. And that's what kept him like falling the prior time. Like he'd be doing well, the other kids would start passing him, and then
Until
he'd try to speed up and go
Mhm.
faster,
Mm.
right? And then
Yeah.
he'd fall. and then he'd like try scooting across the floor, which reminded me
Mhm.
of like a baby reverting back to crawling.
It's
Um,
adorable.
right?
I totally would have done that too.
He was sealing it across the floor. It was great. It was adorable, but at the same time, like it was like, okay, like let's get up and try again. But when he had that space to actually slow down with somebody else versus feeling like he had to keep up with the rest of the pack of kids,
Mhm.
right? He barely fell and he did way better and he got to celebrate each little win
Mhm.
versus it needing to be him having to keep up with everybody else's pace.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important and that's to me
Oh, definitely.
where um the idea of like playing with your edge, that
Mhm.
space that feels a little bit uncomfortable, right?
Mhm.
Versus throwing yourself off the cliff, that space where it's going into complete overwhelm,
Mhm.
right? It can also be like the idea of taking, like eating the proverbial elephant one bite at a time versus trying to eat the whole thing at once.
Yeah, and you've gotta figure out what works for you, because there are some
Hmm.
people who need to blow up everything in order to, like, be able to do the next thing, and there are other
Yeah,
people who need a little bit of security to make them feel safe to go and do this next thing,
yeah,
and it
and
it doesn't change the outcome for that person, it's just we're all different.
yeah, each individual, like you are the only one who can say
Mhm.
how quickly you can move through that space,
Yeah.
right? And that's when you like, so the example with my son ice skating, when he was trying to go at everyone else's pace with that learning experience specifically, that's
Mhm.
when he kept falling. And then respectively, he probably kept feeling like a failure because he wasn't seeing the other kids fall as much as he was.
Mhm.
But he needed to move a little bit slower to get his footing, to find his balance point.
Mhm.
And there's other things where he'll go into it and he takes to it like a fish in water, right? And he can do it really quickly and barely fall, barely stumble. But
Mhm.
there's these different edges for everyone.
Yeah, it's like what
And
you were
it's
saying about skill set.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it's playing with those spaces and that's if you fail, like if you fall, right? If you end up blowing up and losing your shit because you went to that state of overwhelm and trying to
Mhm.
go too fast for yourself, there is no shame in slowing down,
None at all,
right?
and
It's
probably is the better bet too.
yeah. I think a lot of the time we try to make ourselves go too fast. Like there's so much value in slowing down.
Mhm. I mean, it's difficult. And I do, especially with boundaries and slowing down with boundaries.
Hmm.
Something that I do with my clients is I list off, because like there's boundaries, like I mentioned, are complex in how they operate, but also
Hmm.
like how you decipher it for yourself.
Yeah.
Like there are emotional boundaries, there are material boundaries, there are boundaries for time and energy, there are mental boundaries, and there are physical boundaries.
Yep.
And what I like to do with my clients is I tell them, all right, here's this paper and it just says emotional, material, time, energy, mental, and physical. And I have them write out what they are for themselves. What are your emotional boundaries that you want for yourself and how others people treat you and how you want to treat others? Um, and go down the list and then we'll go over it and see how are these showing up for you in your life? And if not, how can we go about setting boundaries for yourself to make sure that these things happen in the way that you want them? And it's a process, it's a skill set. So when I first learned the word boundaries, I was not aware that there were like subcategories to boundaries and the subcategories to the subcategories to those as well. And it is important to notice all of the different categories there are for boundaries and addressing them individually, which is in need of patience and slowing down.
Mhm.
And you'll be faster in some of them and slower in others. And sometimes things will surprise you. Like physical boundaries don't necessarily just mean like whether or not you're okay with PDA or, like people touching your food. It could be, communicating to your partner that one of your physical boundaries is that you want more physical touch or you want less of it.
Mhm.
Like I know for me, I want more of it because my love language is through touch.
Yeah.
And so that's a boundary for me. And the boundary is I don't feel the love as much without as much physical touch. And that's something I need to communicate with my partner to assert their boundaries as well. Because they might not be someone who's like, oh, yeah, I'm just going to like lick your face every 5 minutes. Because they might not be into that. Not everyone likes licking face.
Yeah.
And so it's important to know that that's a physical boundary for myself and to communicate that boundary to my partner so that I can know what their boundary is towards that so that we can find and come to an agreement that works for both of us.
Yeah.
Maybe it won't be kissing in public, but they'll hold your hand so
Well,
that
and
you
there
can.
can be for them, right? Like, let's say they were brought up with these narratives that told them
Mhm,
PDA
mhm.
was not okay at all, right?
Yeah.
Then maybe that's something they want to be able to share with you more
Mhm.
openly. And maybe it doesn't mean like full on making out and groping in public, right?
Yeah.
But even like a peck on the lips or hand holding, right? Or giving a hug in a
Mhm,
public space. Um, but in
mhm,
that having those conversations, like the person who really wants to have like all the PDA in all the
mhm,
spaces, potentially being willing to slow down a little bit, right?
mhm,
The
mhm.
person who is opposed to PDA being willing to push their comfort edge with speeding up. I'm going to tell you, being willing to slow down can also be a comfort edge,
Yeah.
right? Being willing to be patient for another person
Mhm.
can definitely be a comfort edge because we like to have all the things we want to have right now. Like it is it is a part of our society. Um, but it's that space where you're coming together for the relationship. Both of you are willing to once again come to that place of getting comfortable being uncomfortable,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? But it's usually not just one person feeling that discomfort in moving forward.
Mhm. And I do wanna point out that, like, what Alex just explained is boundary setting, but there is a boundary within that boundary of like
Mhm,
how slow you're willing to slow down, how fast you're willing to speed up,
mhm,
and knowing that boundary for yourself and communicating that. And also knowing, or I guess being able to identify, well, actually, before I say that, I'll say this like, these are two parties coming to an agreement on a specific boundary.
mhm.
So you need, maybe I shouldn't say the word need, it would be in your best interest to show up for that boundary every day.
Yeah,
And it is, just because you're slowing down doesn't mean you don't need to pay attention. And what can happen if you don't do that is the boundary gets pushed against. And, if you push on something too far or too much, it'll end up breaking. And so you may have come to that agreement with your partner, but one of you wasn't showing up in the way that you agreed. And so that boundary got broken.
yeah,
And so now you need to come back and reevaluate whether or
yeah, and
not
that's
this is something you want to keep doing.
yeah. Well, and that's where ultimately, like, let's say the person in our example from before that was opposed to PDA. Let's say
Mhm,
that's something they don't ever want to work on. They are
mhm,
perfectly happy in their world
Mhm.
not having PDA, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, they are
No.
allowed
Mhm.
to exist in the world that way.
Mhm.
This other person who really enjoys high PDA and, like, wants that experience, there's also nothing wrong with them having those experiences.
Mhm.
To me, the biggest thing that tells me is, like, if they're not willing to work on it together, then they're just not a good match. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with people not being a good match in those spaces.
Mhm.
To me, it wasn't easy because of attachment styles, right? Um,
Yeah.
I had a lot of anxious attachment and like fear of abandonment and things like that that would show up in my system that told me if this person can't fulfill that for me, then there's something wrong with me. And that's
Mhm.
not the case in either direction. It's just that person's not a good match. And the more you try to push making that happen, even when it's not a good match, usually the more the relationship will pull away.
Yeah. And that touches a little bit on the emotional aspect of boundaries on the personal side.
Mhm.
Is you might be attracted to someone. You might even love them, but it doesn't mean that they're your person for that term. And when you have gone through and assessed for yourself what your emotional boundaries are, and one of them is, I don't do PDA, and then the other person is, oh, I have to have it, but then you both go into that compromising your integral emotional boundaries, that's also gonna and well, not gonna make it finite, but that has the potential to lead to disaster in the long run that might
Mhm.
hurt the love that you have for each other when you could have just what phrasings, um, where you could have evaluated it earlier and come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Don't want to sound too finite and call anybody out, but
Well,
we'll just
it's
leave it at that.
the way I like to look at it, right, anymore
Mhm.
is noticing that it's not a good match. And there's somebody out there who is a better match for each of those people,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? There is somebody who exists in the world that can give that person that open space of PDA, who can give that
Mhm.
person the space of not having to have PDA.
Yeah.
And that those can look many different ways, right? And maybe those people can find agreements that work for them. It's coming back to like you're making an agreement for a relationship. Like I like to look at relationships as almost their own identity, this like
Yeah.
almost separate individual when these two people are coming together in a space. And if
Yeah.
you there there can be many times, and especially if you are very unconscious around your attachment styles, where
Mhm.
like
Mm.
you're an you're an anxious person and you're constantly getting into relationships with somebody who is highly avoidant.
Yeah.
And there can be this very subconscious and unconscious draw because there's parts of your system that are wanting to find healing
Mhm.
in that space, and there's a familiarity because of prior wounds, prior traumas, prior narratives,
Mhm.
or even how you're showing up with your own system. I think that was some of my biggest reflection as I moved through those
Mhm.
spaces is the more I put my anxious energy and that need for somebody else out on another person, the more
Mhm.
I kept abandoning myself
Mhm.
because I would try to change and morph on this very unconscious level to be what they needed and desired so I wouldn't get rejected. And then
Yeah.
when I would get rejected, I'd lost my own identities. I'd lost who I was and even the person they'd fallen in love with.
Yeah. And I've seen that a lot, um, in my professional life and just in general.
Mhm.
A lot of people believe that boundaries are something you assert for other people and not
Mhm.
something that you put into yourself. And like everything you were just saying right now is going through that list that I explained earlier about the emotional, material, time and energy, mental and physical for yourself first
Mhm.
without thought of anyone else.
Yeah.
And then once you've done that and you're concrete in it and you're satisfied, then start bringing one or two people in, not the whole world, not at the same time, at least that'd be bombarding. Um, but bring it in with relationship to what you have set for your own personal being and what you need for your boundaries, just for you to exist in peace and harmony for yourself. Like one of my big boundaries is um, I need time to have by myself to just stare at a television and watch something
Mhm.
stupid or a documentary, something. I need that time. You're welcome to join me, but like I need that time.
Yeah. No,
And
one of
I,
my oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say that I had it took me years to figure that out. That like I would get in fights with partners or friends because friends, I was like, no, I'm watching a movie. I don't want to go out with you. Or partners wouldn't understand why I just wanted to watch my 25-minute anime by myself for a second.
Mhm.
And I couldn't answer them because I had not set that boundary for myself and knew that that was something that I needed for me.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't explain that to them. So that's one of the importances, if importances is the word it is now. Um, Two, setting boundaries for your own personal being before adding other people into the mix.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's time boundaries have definitely been a big one on my side and feeling like I need to go at a faster pace,
Mhm.
right? Especially in romantic and sexual relationships.
Mhm.
That was the thing. And that's one of the spaces I end up spending a lot of my free time, my non-mom time, as I tend to call it, um, is at a sex club, social club, lifestyle club, however you want to deem it. But it's this place that's very open sexually, and people will approach you regularly and let you know, hey, like, I would like to play sexually with you. And I've had many people come up to me in that space. And one of the boundaries I had to define for myself around sexual encounters is that I need a good solid base of friendship
Mhm.
before I go into that space. And that looks different for everyone,
Yeah.
right? Um, like my partner, he also defines himself as being demisexual, but
Mhm.
in that he can talk to a person like over the time span of a week or maybe less than a week if they have like a deep conversation and he's ready to play with them. On my side, there's times that takes me like sometimes it's a night, but usually it's a month at least. Or like I recently played with somebody and I'd been talking with them for a year. But I was having to give myself that slow down and pause to hear my authentic yes versus, oh, this other person wants to do this thing with me. Like
Mhm.
if I want to keep them around, then I need to go faster,
Yeah.
right? Because that was has been a big thing in my system where it's feeling like I have to go at other people's pace. And then I run up against these walls of resistance, or like I'm really in my head during a sexual experience rather than being in my body and
Mhm.
really being present in that moment.
Yeah.
And those things can show up in different ways in all sorts of different areas of our
Yeah.
life. And it's finding what it is you actually need, coming back again to that core of yourself. And like
Mhm.
the more pleasure and happiness you can find in that space, the easier it is to share with everyone else.
Mhm.
And same with self-love. Like that's any of the work I do with people, any of the content I personally put out, it's going to be coming back to that core within yourself, because then it's that overflowing bucket. It's easier to share. It doesn't feel like all these spaces of sacrifice. It
Mhm.
doesn't feel like having to hold up and keep rebuilding this proverbial boundary wall when somebody
Mhm.
else keeps trying to knock it over.
Yeah.
Because it's just an easy no. Like you're not having to fight for that thing anymore. It's just a no, not interested. No thanks.
Mhm.
That's
There's
not
a
for
lot
me.
of yeah. There's a lot of weight, like powerful weight that comes with feeling seen and heard by other people, but feeling seen and heard for yourself is just as powerful.
Mhm.
And being able to pay attention to yourself and know what it is that your boundaries are for yourself, especially in a sexual setting, like you were mentioning. Like, I was thinking about a lot of, as women, we oftentimes feel the pressure to speed things up on a physical or sexual level to not to ease that the fears of abandonment or rejection that
Mhm.
we may encounter if we were to say no. And knowing your boundary, let's say you have a boundary of, I don't sleep with guys on the first date. You now know that for yourself, and you have that respect and integrity within yourself and your boundaries to confidently say no.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, we do live in a world where people are going to push your boundaries on that no. And so having like a, a chain link of boundaries is always a good idea to help you, like a backup boundary for your backup boundary. So I have found in my life, my no's get pushed on. And it took me many years to stop acquiescing at some point to those pushes of my no.
Mhm.
And that, like you were saying earlier, we can assert our boundaries, but they don't necessarily need to be respected. And we don't need to stick around when they're being disrespected.
Yeah.
Our bodies want to stay there, they want to be accepted by this person that you're desperately trying to get to listen to your no. But sometimes just saying it and leaving is what you got to do for yourself. And that's a boundary in and of itself. Is what are you going to do once you assert that no or this boundary, whatever it may be? What is your second step? What are you going to do next? If that makes sense.
Yeah.
If
Well,
they don't respect your boundaries, what are you going to do? If they do respect your boundaries, what are you going to do?
and to me that's that piece of like establishing what is your action,
Yeah.
right? It
Mhm.
doesn't that's where you don't even have to state your action to the other person, right? Or
Mhm.
that this is a boundary for you. That example earlier of being name called,
Mhm.
right? That could have been it, like, versus me deciding to stay in that conversation with this ex partner and continuing to be name called or be told that all these things were my fault, right?
Mhm.
Whatever it was, that's the point where I ended up setting the boundary and being like, hey, like, I'm not going to sit here and be name called. I'm happy to talk when you can not go into that. Because, like,
Mhm.
for me, this was a relationship where I was communicating that, not just hanging up and being done with it,
Mhm.
because, like, I had to continue that relationship
Yeah.
for life circumstances. But And that then I hang up the phone. I don't continue. I don't listen to their arguments of why they're justified in name calling me. Because
Yeah.
in my world, there's no justification for that. There's no need for that. They may feel a need to express that out of their system. I don't have to sit there and take it.
Mhm.
So it was getting really clear for myself that, like, no, I can no longer engage. I can step away, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
But
I
it's, yeah,
think
it's
what
figuring out what that action is. What is your step if that boundary is crossed, if that boundary is respected?
Mhm.
And usually when that boundary is respected, like, it feels easy. It's not something we really think about.
Yeah.
It's also where I like the idea of boundaries, even though I think it can be a little bit limiting, right? As thinking of them initially as non-negotiables
Yeah.
rather than boundaries, because to me, boundaries have felt like this very elusive thing, right? Where either I'm letting them slide and then abandoning myself, or I'm constantly feeling like I'm having to physically hold up this wall and it's exhausting. But the thing that are non-negotiables, that's an easy no. And the space that honestly helped me probably the most with figuring out that play with boundaries was actually looking at hard and soft limits in the world of BDSM and kink. And that you can find them online. I also have one that I created for use with clients. So if anybody wants access to that, please feel free to send me a message and I am happy to share this resource. But it's a list of all these different types of sexual play.
Mhm.
And there are these things called soft limits, which the soft limit is the thing that if you like, there's a resistance there. There's a no, like, I'm not sure if I want to explore that, but maybe it kind of sounds interesting. But there's a resistance in your system. But if you had more trust, more knowledge, more information, more safety around that, yeah, you might be willing to explore it with the right person.
Yeah.
The hard limits are the easy no's. And like for me, that's bestiality. I have no interest in playing with an animal in a sexual way.
Yep.
Um,
Mhm.
there's a thing called blood play. I have no interest in being cut or cutting a partner,
Mhm.
um, or having any sort of blood involved specifically through injuries. Um,
Mhm.
anything that involves young children, automatic, easy, hard no. Like that's it's just not a space I'm going to go on any of those things. But there are those easy no's in everybody's system,
Yeah.
right? I've met people where they're like, I have no boundaries, and I'm like, but you do. Like you go out to get food at a restaurant, and even just looking at their drink menu, they're like, maybe you don't drink coffee. That's a no. That's an easy no for you, right?
Yeah.
Um, you don't like whiskey. That's an easy no for you.
Mhm.
It's finding how the things that are easy no's for you, the things that are easy yes for you, and the things that are a maybe. And if they're a maybe, right, then what makes it a no or what makes it a yes?
Yeah. And that's worth exploring.
Hmm.
Yeah.
For
And
everyone. And
yeah.
it's a fascinating exploration when you
Mhm.
allow yourself to play with it.
Mhm. With childlike wonder, I might suggest is a very good way to do that.
Well, I would suggest that on everything. Highly
Yeah,
curious.
right.
I always love the saying because I've used the phrase "I'm curious" for a long time, and I remember when I was little, the kind of retort from people would be like, "Well, curiosity killed the cat," right?
Mhm.
And years and years later, I ended up hearing an addition to that phrase, and it was like, "But satisfaction brought it back." And I like that in because the curiosity killed the cat brings this narrative that it's not okay to be curious. It's not okay to ask questions or want more information about what this thing is.
Mhm. That I'm in 100% agreement with that, and I wanna add on to it. The same goes with trying new things and stumbling a little bit in the beginning or quote unquote failing in the beginning. It's like we're gonna suck at things in the beginning. It's okay.
Mhm.
And the same with what you just said, like work with those together.
Well, and it's an evolution, like, it's a learning process. You're learning
Mhm,
a whole new skill, like walking
mhm.
as a baby. Like, if
Yeah.
you had decided to just give up in learning to walk as a baby for all the times you fell, you would not be a mobile adult right now, right?
No.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's we have this innate drive for like curiosity and finding new experiences. But once again, there can be all these narratives that tell us it's not okay, don't take the risk, like
Mhm.
stay comfortable. And that keeps us limited. It can keep us in this self-defined box that isn't that expression of our core or authentic self.
Yeah. And I think it's okay if you wanna stay in that box,
Hmm.
but having awareness of the box that you're choosing to stay in is also healthy. You
Yes.
don't have to go out and do things that make you uncomfortable if you're choosing not to.
Yeah, it's
But
finding the things that you're interested in exploring and
yeah,
getting curious about.
yeah. I
It
will
definitely
say
doesn't have to be everything.
yeah, I will say if you are someone who is choosing to stay in their box, be careful with how you speak in the future. 'Cause you've made a choice to stay in this box, which is perfectly fine that you do you. Um, but projecting, let's say jealousies or whatnots to other people who chose not to stay in that box could be a boundary you might want to look at.
Mhm.
And whether or not that's something that you have desire to exist and serve you in your life. If the boundary you're setting is to stay in that box, make sh- it is also a good idea to evaluate how you're treating other people around you who aren't in your box.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of my most, like, valuable resources for a book that I came across, it's called, I think it's The 5 Levels of Attachment by Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. I think that's all correct. But it's giving these examples of the ways we find attachments to belief systems and going from this idea of like at a level 1 we have no attachment, like we can look at something, we have no names or definitions for it,
Mhm.
like we don't know anything about it, we are literally just an observer. And then as it moves up through the rankings, it goes to, okay, you have a little bit more information about this thing, okay, like now you identify with the terms, but you don't necessarily like have a preference still.
Yeah.
But then as you become more of a fan, you're moving higher or closer to level 5, you end up placing judgments on yourself or other people for not identifying the same way you do.
Yeah.
And it's this they end up using soccer or football, as it's called most other places in the world besides the US, as this example, and how when you're getting to level 5 of identifying with a belief system, that's where people like will murder other people for their belief,
Mhm.
right? Or attack other people fully because of their belief, because their way is the only right way.
Mhm. And this does fall into the category of mental within the boundaries that I listed
Mhm.
off for any of those listening out there.
Yeah,
Beliefs is a
the
big mental boundary that
yeah.
that is good to be addressed.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite points of self-reflection. It's actually the first time I ever listened to that book, and I had no idea what that book was even about. I was randomly recommended it by a friend,
Mm.
and I was like in this point of processing around my divorce, and I got this image of myself being trapped in a box.
Oh, no.
And it was this white box that I was
Mm.
like, this is interesting. And I allowed myself to look at it in more and more nuanced layers. And I eventually saw that this box was made of paper. And I was like super contorted and uncomfortable within this box. And I realized each of these pieces of paper was like a post it note, right?
Mhm.
And each one had a different judgment, ideal, belief that my ex husband held for what his partner should be, right? And
Mhm.
these are all little pieces of information I picked up over the course of our relationship, and I had put myself inside this paper box. And I ended up pretty much pausing at that point because I needed to go to work, but I listened to that audiobook throughout the day. And at the end of the day, I was like, wait, this box is made of paper. Like I am the only thing holding myself inside of it
Mhm.
and keeping myself in this really uncomfortable position. And so at the end of the evening, I allowed myself to go through a visualization practice of seeing myself in this box again, but allowing the papers to explode out off of me,
Mhm.
right? And do their flutter and rain down to the ground. And that was honestly one of the first times I felt so free in my system that I no longer had to be this thing,
Mhm.
right? I didn't have to be his ideals. I didn't have to avoid the things that he would place as judgment, as shame, whatever it was.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
in that, it was just this really powerful personal practice of getting to see and feel myself in that really uncomfortable space and realize I was the only thing keeping myself there.
Yeah. I've been having very similar and have had very similar realizations like that in
Hmm.
the past, and it's not the most comfortable even realizing that you are your worst enemy and you're holding yourself back in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot easier to wanna blame the people around us
Hmm. Yeah.
for their beliefs and their ideals and whatever else, but ultimately, when it comes down to it, we are the only ones who can make the choice. It's just a lot of the time we're doing it very subconsciously and unconsciously to keep fitting ourselves into these very uncomfortable boxes.
Yeah. That is it's taken me time, everyone who's listening, so don't take this as if like I just started doing it overnight. But that is one of my integral boundaries that I have for myself is whenever I'm reacting or I'm talking my feelings or my truth to someone, I always check myself to make sure that I'm not projecting any of my personal beliefs or boundaries or whatever onto that person and that I'm always listening as well. So if
Mhm.
someone were to say to me, like, I don't think you understand what I'm saying to me, or uh, something along those lines, that's a boundary I've set to myself is okay, pause and run over what they're saying. Is there validity to that? Are you conveying what you mean correctly?
Yeah.
Instead of barking back, being like, what do you mean? I just told you what I'm saying. Like, how could you not understand? Like, that is one of my boundaries for myself to catch myself so that I don't fall into old patterns of blaming other people for whatever's happening or transpiring in my life.
Yeah, using active listening skills and
Mhm.
mirroring reflection. So, like, even if
Mhm.
Rachel and I or Rachel Rose and I were sitting down having a conversation, and she stated something, and even if I started to feel that initial flare, instead of allowing that to now overtake and get defensive, right?
Mhm.
Literally mirroring back, even if it's verbatim, what I heard her just say can be highly valuable
Mhm.
in that. It helps you connect more empathetically with the person rather than having your defenses go up.
Mhm.
It can also give them a point of reflection for
Yeah.
what they just said and the opportunity to correct what they said as well.
And to calm themselves down as well. It gives them a
Mhm.
chance to regulate themselves because
Yes.
it gives them an opportunity in that argument, which most of us don't really feel seen and heard by the person we're having a argument with. So by stating that, it cuts the tension by making them feel seen and heard so that they can pause with you in that moment.
Mhm.
And that's very important.
Yeah, and if you can't come to those spaces on your own with a partner, reaching out to a coach, to a counselor, to
Mhm.
a
Like some,
moderator of some sort who can
yeah.
like stay unbiased. Like that, it can be harder when
Yes.
you're bringing in friends or family because a
Mhm.
lot of the times they'll have the social conditioning where they'll want to take sides.
Mhm.
Um, but finding somebody who can stay unbiased and once again get curious about your situation, to ask questions, to slow down that space
Mhm.
so everybody has the opportunity to feel heard and seen, and you can actually come to these spaces of understanding.
Yeah. And then I'll also say when you do that, once you do come to those realizations with your partner, whoever it is you're talking to, what happens after is like beautiful. You within yourself, within your relationship, there's a peace to it. You could literally like I've had moments where I've just been like, "Okay, we've done that. Do you want to go get ice cream?"
Hmm.
And then they're like, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea." And then we go have a really good time. It hasn't even been 10 minutes since we came to our agreement, and we're already going off and having a fun time together eating ice cream.
Yeah, no, that's one of the most powerful um, like couples counseling sessions I ever went through. Was actually with a counselor who directly told us he was not a couples counselor or family counselor. And
Mhm.
pretty much what he did during that session was um, make us mirror each other in conversation. And at the end of it, it was the most connected I had felt with that partner
Mhm.
in at least a couple years. Right. And that's saying a
Yeah.
lot for the fact that we were together for 3 years.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
um, it had been a long time, and I hadn't realized that I hadn't felt connected or seen or
Mhm.
heard.
Yeah. And sometimes it fades so slowly that we don't notice it's gone.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
before we get going, I do want to encourage anyone who's listening that if you have 10 minutes to spare after listening to this, to take out a pen and a paper and just write on it, boundaries for me. List off, write down emotional, material, time and energy, mental, and physical, and just fill in the blanks there. What do you want for boundaries for you emotionally? What boundaries do you want materially? And that can look like possessions, that could look like how it is that you want to be treated, or time and energy. What boundaries do you want showing up for you? Mental, like beliefs, opinions, and then physical. And that could be physical comments about you as well. It doesn't have to be like touch. But
Hmm.
going over that's my homework for you guys.
Little self-exploration is
And
always
it'll
lovely.
be it'll be great fun, and if you have any questions about that or you wanna send me what you came up with to get feedback, there's a link somewhere that you can get access to me for, and I would love to look over what you've come up with and talk to you about it.
All right, I think that that wraps us up for today. Next week, we will be here on Thursday, unless there are any scheduling plans, and that will be updated via social media platforms. You can also find the most up-to-date time and date of the next session on the Clubhouse platform for the Sexient Beings group. Next week, we're going to talk about abuse in relationships and the different ways that can show up. And if you have any specific questions around the ways that abuse shows up in relationships, please feel free to DM them to us.
Mhm,
And we will add that into that session and make sure they are addressed. Or if we were to get a flood of them, that the top ones are addressed.
mhm.
Um, and same with over any other social media platforms as well. We will be putting that thread out there to get people's questions around how abuse shows up in relationships. Do you have anything else to add, Rachel?
No, and you're also welcome to just show up and ask your questions on Thursday if you
Yes.
want to as well. Yeah.
Yes. Beautiful. Well, it was wonderful holding this space and session time.
Yeah.
And as always, I look forward to our call next week. And thank you for joining me, Rachelrose.
You are welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.